I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's Bible study. I think you're going to be enjoying this one. It's going to be a little bit less heavier than what I've been giving you for the past 6 months, a year. I've been throwing you heavy meat, heavy cows, still in their skin. So it's going to be a little bit lighter tonight.
Hey Frank.
Yeah.
Why did the priest giggle during his homily? He had mass hysteria. Sorry. Welcome to Foundational Bible Teachings. Your free gifts are in the description, so go take your scripture prescriptions.
So what's God like? Genesis 49:24 speaks of the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. Psalm 89:10 speaks of his strong arm. Psalm 91:4 speaks of his feathers and his wings. Proverbs 15:3 speaks of the eyes of the Lord being in every place. Psalm 18:8 speaks of his nostrils and his mouth. Psalm 18:9 speaks of his feet, and I can go on and on and on, which I'm going to be doing in this Bible study. So the question is God a weird creature with arms, heads, wings, feathers, and everything else? Go to John 4:24. This is going to start giving you the true picture of who and what God is. In John 4:24 it says, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. A spirit has no physical attributes as a human has. So God continues of him having no physical attributes. I want you to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 11. And ye came near and stood under the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire unto the midst of heaven, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. And the Lord spake unto you out of the midst of the fire. Ye heard the voice of the words, but saw no similitude, only you heard a voice. So they didn't see anything, they just heard something. And he declared unto you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, the 10 commandments, and he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that ye might do them in the land whither ye go over to possess it. Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves. You saw no manner of similitude. You didn't see any likeness of nothing on the day that the Lord spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire. Lest ye corrupt yourselves and make you a graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of any male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged fowl that flieth in the air, the likeness of anything that creepeth on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the waters beneath the earth. And lest thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, and all the hosts of heaven should be driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord thy God had divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. So he even gives you a list of what not to make. I just finished giving you a small list of God having his arm and his hands and wings and feathers and whatever else. Let's keep going now. The question is this: why does God then describe himself as having these physical attributes of hands, wings, feet, ears, feathers? Why does he say that? So that we, speaking of man, can understand God, who he is and what he is, his character, his attributes, how he wheels and deals in our lives in this creation. Now we have a very finite mind, and our comprehension is confined to this time and space continuum that we're actually in. So he speaks and acts in ways that we will understand because he lowered that understanding to our level of comprehension. Did you get that? He had to lower everything because the IQ that we have is very low. He spoke it in a way that we would understand with stuff which we already know. Example: explain envy or jealousy to a grasshopper. I want you to explain adultery to a dog. If you don't lower yourself at the level of these animals or these insects, they would never understand. So like these things are foreign to the grasshopper and to the dog, so is God's makeup and his ways to us human beings. We just can't attain to it. We have somehow an understanding. Some maybe a little bit more, many a lot less. So tonight I'd like to look at how God is described with human and physical attributes, including their symbolism and how they impact and help humanity, especially those that are called by His name. I'm talking about His saints. You will also notice that these verses, many of these verses and passages, become promises that we actually stand on. So let's begin. God's hands. I want you to turn to Isaiah 41:10. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. So God's hand symbolizes power, protection, and righteousness. What's the impact on us? How does it affect us? God's hands reassures us of His strength and constant support in times of fear and weakness. This one I can attest to with some of the stuff that I had happening in my house. Okay? Number 2, God's mighty hand. I want you to turn to Deuteronomy 26 and verse 8 now. So as you're turning there, you could memorize Isaiah 41:10. I had my child, my firstborn, memorize this. He must have been, how old was he? 5, 6 years old, 7 years old. He was about there somewhere. There was stuff that was happening. He was seeing things in his room that I couldn't see. And he was a little bit scared. I says, you know what? Memorize this verse. Whenever you see these things in your room, I want you to quote the verse. And by quoting the verse, it helped him out. And whatever was there basically would just disappear. So fear thou not, for I am with thee. Look at the promise that God's giving you. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. And the truth to this, I can attest to it. So God's mighty hand now, Deuteronomy 26:8. Everybody there? And the Lord brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with great terribleness, with signs and with wonders. God's mighty hand represents deliverance and strength. Have you ever been in a situation where you need deliverance? Could be a bully, could be whatever situation you might be in. I've been in some of these situations. One night, apparently they had packed 2 cars for them to come and get me because I had witnessed to some people a few hours before. This was 4 o'clock in the morning. I got a phone call. We just loaded up 2 cars. I'd just gotten saved. And I said, I closed the phone. My wife, she woke up, she goes, what is it? I says, nothing. I go, just go back to bed, and I prayed. I says, God, how does this work now? Do I use what I know and go out there and meet these 2 cars? I was alone. Or how does this work now? The cars never came. For the next 2 weeks I grew eyes in the back of my head. Okay? Another story is coming to mind. There was this young girl, the dad had passed away, the mom ended up getting a boyfriend. And this boyfriend that came in really hated this girl. So as a little girl, he kept telling her, one day I'm going to kill you, one day I'm going to kill you. So she grew up with this thing, one day he's going to kill me. So there was sort of like a fear there. By the age of 15, 16, this girl finally gets up and she leaves. One day she gets a phone call. And he goes, hi, do you know who this is? He goes, yeah. He goes, how you doing? I'm going to make up a name now. Let's say Dave. Yeah, Dave, it's you. How are you? Yeah, remember that promise? He goes, I'm coming to get you. And he hangs up. She puts down the phone and trembling, she falls to her knees and she's praying. She had just gotten saved. And she's praying that this guy wouldn't come. She's praying, God, you got to protect me. You got to protect me. 3 days later, this poor girl did not sleep in 72 hours. She gets a phone call from the mom. Have you heard what happened to Dave? No, Mom. How do you want me to have any news? Well, just to let you know, he passed away. So happy, sad, scared. What do you mean? When did this happen? This happened 3 days ago. What happened? This is what happened. He was at work. He gets to the phone booth. He makes a phone call. This is what his coworker said. He got to his car, finished drinking his beer, crushed the can, threw it on the floor, took the handle of his car, was opening it. As the door was opening, he drops dead. That's when the girl was praying. Fear thou not, for I am thy God. I will help thee. I will strengthen thee. You're going through a situation, you rely on God. Let's keep going. So what's the impact on us now? On Deuteronomy 26:8. God's hand reminds us of His ability to rescue us. That it's from sin, oppression, or any troubling situation that you might be in. Number 3, the shadow of his hand. I want you to turn to Isaiah 49:2. And he hath made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand hath he hid me, and made me a polished shaft. In his quiver hath he hid me. The shadow of his hand signifies protection and concealment from harm. What's the impact on us? How is it going to affect us? We find safety and security knowing God shields us from danger. Another story which I've already told you, I'm going to say it again. Young girl, about 8:30 at night, she's going home. She's got to pass through this narrow walkway. And there's a guy with a foot against the wall smoking a cigarette. And she sees the guy and she starts praying, Lord, please protect me. So she's going. From far, she sees the guy. As she's approaching, she turns her gaze away and she walks through. Next morning, in the papers, there was somebody that got basically raped and killed in the same spot she had walked on, maybe about an hour later or something. Finally, they're asking, if you have any information, maybe you can come into the police station, help us to identify who this guy was. This girl happens to go. He goes, make sure that I'm anonymous, nobody knows. She goes, no, they won't know you. They put him on the wall. He goes, that's the guy. And he goes, and you passed by there? Says, I passed by there about 8:30, and the other girl passed by maybe half an hour later. So the girl leaves, and they says, okay, we got somebody that, he goes, you better confess, or else you're going to go to court, you're going to fry. He goes, there was another girl that passed by around 8:30. He goes, what happened? Why didn't you take her? You mean the girl with these two big buffed guys walking beside her? There was no way I was going to mess with that girl. Okay? Now there's things that we don't see, but God, He sends His angels to actually protect us.
That's a true story?
That's a true story, yeah. I heard this like 25 years ago. So it's an old story. Let's look at the fourth point. God's eyes and ears. I want you to turn to Psalm 34:15. The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and His ears are open unto their cry. God's ears symbolizes His attentiveness to our prayers and cries for our help. So what does God's eyes symbolize? It symbolizes God's omniscience, His perfect knowledge and awareness of all things, particularly the lives and needs of the righteous. Care and watchfulness, His constant attention and concern for His people. Protection, His ability to observe and intervene in the lives of the righteous for their good. Now, what's the impact on us, or how does it affect us now? Encouragement, knowing that God is always watching and gives believers reassurance that they are never alone. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Accountability, God's eyes reminds us to live uprightly as He observes both good and evil. In Proverbs 15:3, we don't have it in our notes, I'm going to quote it for you. For the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. He sees when you're evil. He sees when you're good. He sees these things. Comfort in trials. This verse assures us that God is faithfully aware of our struggles and stands ready for help. He will only help when you open your mouth and you lay your request at His feet. 1 Peter 5:7, casting your care upon Him, for He careth for you. In all things, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication. Don't worry about anything, don't have any anxiety. But there's a condition to that. I just want you to come and you ask me. How many times I needed money to finish paying my rent, I didn't have enough money, or not enough food on the table, or clothing on my children's back. I worked 2-3 jobs, I was working a minimum wage, my wife wasn't working. I did a lot of praying, and because of that, it strengthened my faith. Here's another example of God's eyes. In 2 Chronicles chapter 16 and verse 9, for the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show Himself strong in the behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward Him. Herein thou hast done foolishly, therefore from henceforth thou shalt have wars. So forget that part, but the first part. The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show Himself strong on the behalf of those whose heart is perfect towards Him. Now God's eyes here represents His omniscience, His watchful care over His people. What's the impact on us? How does it affect us? We are strengthened by knowing that God is constantly watching and protecting those who trust in Him. God's eyes signify his personal involvement in the lives of the righteous. We're talking about his saints, those that are in Christ, this particular dispensation, ensuring their well-being and hearing their cries for help. The fifth point, God's feet. I want you to turn to Isaiah chapter 66 and verse 1. If you're walking with the Lord and you're called by his name, you're going to make it a point to make sure that your heart's going to be perfect towards God. We have freedom in Christ. We can go out there and fornicate all we want. The thing is that if we're saved, if you're truly saved, that is the last thing on your mind. It's not even on your mind for it to be the last thing, because it's not even there. You want to please God. We're working in a way that we want to please God. Yes, we slip, we stumble, we fall, but God is there to pick us up. That's what the word grace means. It's a gift that he's given us. So I don't have to worry about that. So for me, it's to have a perfect heart towards God. Thus saith the Lord, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that ye build unto me? And where is the place of my rest? So God's feet symbolizes dominion, authority, and his presence in this creation. He's using this earth as his footstool. What's the impact on us? How is it going to affect us? We are reminded of God's sovereignty over all things and find peace in his supreme authority, knowing that he's still sitting on the throne. Yes, but how can all these bad things be happening in the world? You need to understand, when God created man, he gave us choice. He made us free moral agents. He gave us free choice. By giving us free choice, you have the choice to kill somebody or not to kill somebody. You have the choice to make war or to make peace. And this is something that he leaves in your hands. And eventually, when you're going to breathe your last breath, everybody's going to a judgment. Everybody, bar none, is going to a judgment. God is allowing it to happen, and God warns. Go out there, do what your heart tells you to do. If it's evil, if it's good, if it's in between, whatever, go do it. But I'm warning you, everybody will be brought to judgment. You've been warned. Number 6, God's arm. Psalm 89:13 now. Thou hast a mighty arm, strong is thy hand, and high is thy right hand. God's mighty arm symbolizes strength and the power to save and deliver. Impact on us. What is it? How does it affect us? God's strong arm assures us of his ability to rescue and protect us from any harm that's basically out there. Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 27. We'll be looking at the first part of the verse. The eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. God's arms here represent support and everlasting strength. What's the impact on you? How is it going to affect you? We rest in his unending strength to carry us through our earthly difficulties, whatever it is. As Job said, man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upwards. When you start a campfire, it's only natural for the sparks to go upward. It's only natural that every human being will be going through some type of a hardship, heartache, or trouble in their lives. This is normal. When this happens, what do? You pray. When you have a chance, read Psalm 107. There's 4 situations there. What about God's mouth? Deuteronomy 8:3 now. And he humbled thee, and suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna, which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live. So this is the verse that Jesus was quoting to Satan in Matthew chapter 4. So the mouth of the Lord, what does it represent? His spoken word, truth and instruction. Our lives are built on those words, like the man who built his house on the rock. You can build your house on sand, but if you build your house on the rock, which is Jesus Christ, what is it? 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verses 10 through 15. Paul basically said it. Other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ is our foundation. So what's the impact on us? How does it affect us? His words, they guide. Again, I can attest to that. They sustain and they give life to those who obey him. It can be eternal life. It can also be life here in this world. Number 8, God's nostrils. God has nostrils. Exodus chapter 15 and verse 8 now. And with the blast of thy nostrils, the waters were gathered together. The floods stood upright as an heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. The nostrils symbolizes God's breath and power over creation. The impact that it has on us and how it affects us, we see his control over nature and are reminded of his ability to work wonders for our deliverance. There's a video that I have in my files. If I remember correctly, there was Syria, there was Israel, and there was a sandstorm that was happening in Syria, but there was a wall there. So the sand would not pass over into Israeli territory. And this video that I have is about 30 seconds, 45 seconds. And the soldiers, they were just filming this phenomenon. How can this be? So you've got this sandstorm happening, but then there's a wall. It seemed to be right on the border of Syria and Israel. How can that be? God is in charge of nature. And we're reminded of his ability to work wonders for our deliverance, whatever it is. God's heart. Hosea chapter 11 and verse 8 now. How shall I give thee up, Ephraim? How shall I deliver thee, Israel? How shall I make thee as Admah? How shall I set thee as Zeboim? Mine heart is turned within me, my repentings are kindled together. God's heart reflects his love, his compassion. It reflects his mercy. What's the impact that it has on us? How does that affect us? We are comforted by God's unfailing love and his desire to forgive us and to restore us. John 3:16 comes to mind. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. God has feathers. This is the 10th point. Psalm 91:4. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. God's feathers represents his protective care and refuge as a hen gathers her chicks under her protective wings. So what's the impact on us? How does it affect us? We find safety and trust in God's loving protection. Again, I can attest to this. So the 11th point now, God's fingers. Exodus chapter 31 and verse 18. And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone written with the finger of God. Does God have a finger? Absolutely not. So God's finger symbolizes his precision, his authority, and his direct involvement. Here we see the direct involvement in Israel. They were slaves for the longest time, and what happens when you free slaves? They need a law right away. And God's law came into being, and he made sure that it was a fair law. So, you have his precision, his authority, and you have his direct involvement within the nation of Israel. Now, how does that impact us? How does it affect us? His finger assures us of his direct interaction with humanity through his commandments and through his guidance. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. God's working fingers represents God's intricate and detailed handiwork. If you look at Psalm 139 is coming to mind. If you look at the way that the human body has been created, to say that we evolved, that takes a lot of faith. When you look at the human body and how everything interacts with each other, how the human body interacts in the environment in which we're in. You've got all kinds of different ecosystems. When we breathe out carbon dioxide, we're breathing in oxygen. You have the trees taking in the carbon dioxide, reciprocating it. You've got such a delicate balance. We are at the right distance from the sun, and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you look at the eye, the way that the eye has been created, if you look at the taste buds, if you look at the cell, I remember in biology, looking at the cell, the more you zoomed in with a microscope, the more you would see in there. It was just incredible. So how does it impact us, and how does it affect us? We marvel at his creativity, and we sing about it. How great thou art. We trust in his ability to carefully manage our lives. Point number 13, God's back. I want you to turn to Exodus 33:23 now. And I will take away mine hand, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen. God's back signifies his transcendence and the glimpse of his glory we are allowed to see partly, a little bit that Moses saw here on this earth, which we will eventually see fully once we're going to be on the other side. So what's the impact? How does that affect us? We are reminded of His holiness and the privilege of knowing even a fraction of His majesty and how great God is. So Psalm 29:4, the voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. God's voice signifies authority, creation, and revelation. When God speaks, it is authoritative. Even Satan is under God's command. Creation, He speaks and it is. Revelation, He speaks today for something that will happen tomorrow. So what's the impact on us? How does that affect us? His voice assures us of His power to command and guide us through life. And His feet, like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and His voice as the sound of many waters. God's feet of brass symbolizes stability, judgment, and purity. What's the impact of that? And how does that affect us in our lives? God's unshakable foundation supports the believer in the shifting world that we are living in. We are living in uncertain times. Man has always lived in uncertain times. But today, the uncertain times is even more. As Jesus' coming is approaching, and it's really almost upon us, because we're seeing the signs of the times. We know that it's about to happen, and this is what the believer is waiting for. In the shifting world that we're living in, we don't know what is and what isn't. But those that have rested their minds and their hearts on God, on His Word, you cannot go wrong, and He gives you a peace which passes all understanding. I've had people asking me, why are you so calm when the world is just going to pots? Because my faith and my trust is in the Lord my God. He's got everything in His hand. Number 16, God's shadow of His wings. I want you to turn to Psalm 63:7. Because Thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of Thy wings will I rejoice. Does God have wings? Does God have a shadow? Does the Spirit have a shadow? But why is it in the Bible? The symbolism. The shadow represents God's comforting and protective presence. What's the impact on us? How does that affect us? We rejoice in the safety, peace, and help found in God's nearness. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. That's what He promised us. And again, I can attest to that. 17, God's countenance, God's face. I want you to turn to Numbers chapter 6, verse 25. The Lord make His face shine upon thee, and be gracious unto thee. 26. The Lord lift up His countenance upon thee, and give thee peace. So God's countenance signifies His favor, His blessing, and His peace. How does that impact our lives, and how does it affect us? Knowing that God looks upon us, we are blessed and filled with peace and with grace. Especially now in this time period, in the church age, under the gospel of the grace of God. Number 18, God's hiding place. I want you to turn to Psalm 32:7. Thou art my hiding place. Thou shalt preserve me from trouble. Thou shalt compass me about with songs of deliverance. Selah. Memorize this. Memorize this. Whenever you're in a situation, say, hey God, I'm coming to you. I want you to basically protect me. You are my hiding place. I'm running to you. So God's hiding place represents safety and comfort. Everybody goes through situations. However scary, however frightful it might be, turn to the Lord and watch. This was one of my wife's favorite verses. Stand still and see the salvation of your God. This was her favorite verse. And whenever she was going through a situation, she goes, Lord, I'm standing still. I want to see your salvation. So how does it impact us? How does that affect us? God provides a secure refuge during trials and filling us with peace during that trial. Whatever trial you might be going through. business, employees, children, husbands, spouses, you've got children, you've got financial, whatever you might be going through, God will give you the peace if you know how to pray and how to take your care and cast it upon Him. Once you know how to throw your care upon Him, watch what's going to happen in your life. Number 19, God's breath. I want you to turn to Job 33 and 4. The Spirit of God hath made me, and the breath of the Almighty hath given me life. God's breath symbolizes life and sustenance. What's the impact? How does that affect us? We are reminded that our very existence depends on God's life-giving power. We read before, our lives depend on every word that comes out of the mouth of God. For whatever situation you might be going through, there's a word that He said that you can apply and that you can actually rest on. Number 20, God's shoulders. I want you to turn to Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6. We'll be looking at the first part of that verse. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon His shoulder. God's shoulders represents His authority and responsibility. He has everything on His shoulders. What's the impact on us? How does that affect us? We are reassured that Christ carries the weight of all the governments and our burdens with divine power. So when He's going to come and rule and reign in the millennium, after the tribulation, after Daniel's 70th week, that we're going to be in the millennium, it's going to be a one world government. It's going to be a dictatorship. But in this dictatorship, there's going to be peace all throughout. The wolf will lay down with the lamb. A child will be able to play over the hole of an asp, which is a very poisonous snake, and the snake will not harm the child. Right now we're having a hard time, let's say, farming. Part of the curse will be taken off. There's another verse, I forget where it is, where it says that the reaper will overtake the sower. How does that work? At the beginning, when it's month of March, April, May, around there, June, the farmers, they start putting their seed. They got to wait 3-4 months, and all of a sudden the fruits, the vegetables, they start coming out. They got to wait. When Jesus Christ will come back, when that sower plants that seed and he takes 3-4 steps, it's already grown. So the guy behind them is actually picking it up and says, you want to walk faster, plant faster. Because part of the curse will be taken off. He's going to rule with a rod of iron. He's going to make sure that everything is going to be straight. And there's nobody that's going to blind his eyes. What does that mean? Nobody would be able to bribe Jesus Christ. So 21, God's hair white as wool and His eyes as flames. I want you to turn to Revelation 1:14. His head and His hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and His eyes were as a flame of fire. The white hair represents wisdom, eternity, purity. The impact that it has on us and how it affects us. We gain confidence in God's eternal wisdom and holiness guiding in our lives. God's eyes of flame signify judgment, knowledge, again purity. Fire purifies. Impact on us. What is it? How does that affect us? We are reminded that nothing escapes God's gaze. He sees everything. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. And He purifies and judges with righteousness. Now, through the symbolism, we gain a deeper understanding of God in this world that we are currently living in. These verses collectively demonstrate how His attributes reveals His power, His care, His active presence in our lives, providing us with comfort, strength, protection, and of course salvation. Part of God's involvement in our lives is the gift of eternal life that He offers to all who want it. If you want it, I just want you to watch this 3-minute video. What I gave you is just a glimpse of who and what God is and how He works and how He affects our lives.